Hi, welcome to KJ and Tony Love France.
And today we're going to fulfill a promise we made to you a couple of weeks ago and then again last week, in that we're going to bring to you an interview that we did with two people who moved to France more than 10 years ago and along the way decided to start a business of helping people to move to France. And they're a wealth of information. And what I loved about it, and I hope that you love about it too, is that they don't just talk about the rules, they talk about the pragmatic way about going about doing things. I think that's so important because we see the rules and is it really like that? And in some cases it is, and in some cases not so much.
So it's a long one because we did ask a lot of questions. We posed to them all of the questions that our viewers asked us, and you may be one of those viewers who asked a question. So they're answering all of those questions and then questions that we had that are specific to our own experience. And you'll notice when we go ahead and get started that the annotation, the logo, now is back to KJ and Tony Move to France. And we've actually converted our name back to KJ and Tony Move to France because that is what we're doing.
Right. If I could add just one thing that I noticed, um, we did answer all the questions we had at the filming.
At the filming.
We got a question literally the next day, but I think through the whole video, that question did get answered, even though it wasn't asked in exactly the same words that you asked it.
Right. So without any further delay, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, let's get to the interview. Welcome, Molly and Stephen, to KJ and Tony Love France. We are so excited to have you here as people who have moved to France yourselves as Americans and have a lot of experience, and you have a lot of resources and tools. And so we have our questions ready for you. But first, before we jump into those questions, if you could share a little bit about yourselves and how you came to know each other and be in Paris, and just whatever you think our viewers might be interested in knowing.
Well, Molly and I have parallel journeys that at some point intersected and built together. Mine came after I sold a tutoring business in America in 2012, and I spent the next year working for the new owner and preparing to come to France. I had to do the research on how to get a visa. I know today your watchers and listeners may be very maybe overwhelmed with information. You can find it on YouTube, you can find it on the internet. But in 2012, I assure you, there was not a lot of information.
Mhm.
So I really had to piece it together myself. And I found it difficult enough that when I went to the Chicago consulate to get my visa, I photographed it, I gave instructions, I put together a list of what to do, and I put it on a blog that I'd created called The American in Paris, which was really going to be more of a personal blog. I don't, I can tell you, I never intended it to be an immigration help blog, if
Mhm.
that's what it became. But I put that article up, and it was the start of something that I had no idea would happen, which was people would email me and say, "Hey, I printed out your article and I got my visa and I want to buy you a cup of coffee next time I'm in Paris." Okay, great, free coffee. And then that turned into, could I pay you to help me with my application? And I thought, you want to give me money? Oh, okay, sure. I can help you with that. And those questions were frequent enough that eventually they would turn into a video course and a book. But Molly enters the story before that. And Molly would become a writer for The American in Paris. But that was because I met her originally building my little Airbnb empire in Paris. And I needed help cleaning apartments and meeting guests and showing them around the neighborhood and explaining to them how life in France worked. And Molly and I met at a coffee shop. We still are unclear of the year, whether it's 2016 or 2017, but we met, and I will stop my story there, and I'll let Molly take over and work backwards a bit.
Yeah, so when Steve and I met, I was a student at the time. I was doing an intensive year-long program to study French at Nanterre, which is a university just outside of Paris. And they have basically a French as a foreign language program. And anyone who's watching who wants to do that, I recommend Nanterre with everything. I love that school. I learned so much. I went in there really with very minimal knowledge, and I came out having the confidence to actually converse with French people and create relationships with French people and really integrate into French culture. And so the program in itself, it was very intense. So it was between 20, I believe the course, like the class time was 25 hours plus 5 hours of like outside time, so it was 30 hours a week of classes. But I still needed some pocket money to be able to survive there. I had very luckily found a great situation for my apartment in which I traded English lessons for my little minuscule shoebox sized apartment and the like rooftops of Paris. So I didn't have to worry about paying rent, but I needed to obviously pay for groceries, my cell phone, transport, everything, wanting to go out and have fun. So I was looking for a student job, basically a weekend thing with very minimal hours. And I came across Stephen advertising for Airbnb greeter, and that's how we met. But before I started the intensive French program, I had been living in France already for about 2.5 years. I initially went over to be a live-in nanny, so an au pair for a Franco-American family.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great introduction, a great easy way as a young person to move abroad because my housing was taken care of, my food was taken care of, cell phone, my Navigo to get around Paris was taken care of. And in exchange, I was to speak in American English with the children. Like that was my biggest job, which made my life very easy because, it was essentially just babysitting. But I didn't really learn French through that family. In a way, I somewhat did just through living with them and being a sponge and kind of soaking it all up. Watching children's TV shows and movies with the kids, I learned a lot as a sponge, I would say, but I didn't have like the confidence to really communicate. And that is when I decided at the end of that nannying stint to really want to integrate. And in order to do that, I really needed to learn French. And so that's how I ended up at Nanterre. That's how I met Stephen. The year goes by. As I mentioned, I learned French. I was able to speak it at the end of that. I received a certificate that stated my level. So then I was able to enroll in a French public university. And alongside that, as I was going to French university, Stephen was like, I've got this website, The American in Paris, and I get a lot of questions on how to obtain the student visa. And so that was my first article that I did for Tape. And from there, I continued to work with Stephen. I became, a very regular writer on the site. And we eventually got to a point where we kind of looked at each other along with another writer, third co-writer of our book, like we could turn this into a book. We could turn this into a resource to really be able to help people. And so that's how 29 Days to France was born.
Insert prop here.
Yes.
Yeah.
We both
And
have our
I have
copies.
it and I have read it and I can attest to the fact that it's very helpful and you have multiple ways in which you can attain it, whether that's through the daily emails, I've done both. I did the daily emails and then I downloaded the EPUB, and then you can also purchase the hardcover as well. So I find it very interesting. I didn't know this part of the story at all. I came across you on another YouTube channel where you were interviewed, and I don't know if it wasn't a part of it or I didn't see it, but it's very interesting, especially for us having a son who plans on moving with us. And he actually plans to attend, well, he's applying, so we're praying and hoping to attend a university, the University Côte d'Azur. And I know my pronunciation of French is horrible, so I apologize.
That's not terrible.
And what's interesting about this is that it's a master's program. He's going to be doing a master's degree, and you have to speak English. It's all in English, which we feel like was heaven sent. So he'll be applying for that student visa. So I'll be going back and reading that blog article for sure. And that leads into one of our first questions from our viewers because we have a few questions from our viewers, and then, of course, we have our own questions. But the first one that I'd like to pose to you, because it is about the visa and the visa process, is from a Pierre Corin 354. And they say, if you plan to stay more than a year, will you have to take a language test to renew your visa? Because we've heard there have been reports that they're upping the language requirements for, I think it's for like residency, though. I'm not sure if it's actually to obtain a visa.
So we have to get our words right. I think part of it as foreigners, we use them interchangeably. So
Right.
the visa is that document you use to originally attain residency. But once
Hmm.
you're in France, then you're a resident, you could say.
Hmm.
And there are different classes of residency. So even if you're only there on a student visa or 1 year, you are a resident of France legally. So what you're alluding to and what the questioner is alluding to is a question of law, you could say the golden ticket of residency, which is the 10-year card.
Hmm.
That's the only residency status that requires language. And it's being upped. So it used to be A2. And for people who don't know about the Delft levels, we have several articles about that on the American Paris, or you can look on Google, but it just classifies where you are in the French language. So it goes A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. And
Hmm.
at C2, you're reading Hugo,
Hmm.
and at A1, you're saying, my name is.
Right.
So A2 is all that was required for the
Mhm.
10-year card for some years, and that's being moved to B1.
Okay.
And people shouldn't panic if you live in France and you interact with French people and you do something like what Molly did. I also did an intensive French course, slightly less serious than Molly's. I went to Alpine French School in Morzine. So
Mhm.
we had classes in the morning and skied in the afternoon. So and if you do that
Not
in the
too bad.
summertime,
Not too
if you do it in the summertime, you can hike in the afternoon.
bad.
But the point is B1 should not be difficult to obtain. And what used to be the level for citizenship, B1 is going to move to B2, and they're
Mhm.
talking about adding a history test. But let's move citizenship aside. Just focus on the 10-year residence card. You don't have to get the 10-year residence card. You can
Mhm.
continue to renew a visitor visa indefinitely. It was excluded from a recent June 2025 update to the law, June 2024. Molly might know and correct me, but the point being that if you're a visitor, you can renew that indefinitely. And there are many people Molly and I have run into in France who've just done that for 20 years. They've just
Right.
renewed a 1 year visitor visa. It's a bit annoying, but you can do that. And there's no language requirement. You just need to show up, show them that you're continuing to live in
Mhm.
France, you're not a troublemaker.
Is there a benefit? Is there a benefit to doing the 10-year other than the 10 years? Is there some like an insurance benefit or anything like
Well,
that?
I would argue that the 10-year is the benefit. You don't have to
Okay.
go to immigration for 10
Right.
years.
Right.
Okay.
Mhm.
That's the number one. Secondly, you have an out of country permission. Similar, so in the United States, the limit for the green card is 6 months. You cannot be outside of the United States for more than 6 months, even though it's a permanent resident card. So in France, under the 10-year card, it's 3 years. You could
Mhm.
be out of France for up to 3 years
Mhm.
consecutively and not pay taxes. You could leave the fiscal system of France and still be legal. The 10-year card also gives you the right to work in
Mm.
France.
And this is let
Uh,
me just
Go ahead.
because this is has been a point of concern for me from the time what I don't know if you know our history at all, but we moved to Paris in 2022 with the intention of retiring there, and then moved back a few months later. That was basically because of struggles that I had with family, with health. A few different reasons, but one of the things that caused me stress during that time was this: you can't work. right? And
Mm.
we are both, Tony is, for all intents and purposes, retired. He is officially retired because he is 68, and yet still does his private practice therapy all online, and I do as well. And so I have been considering applying because I've written a few books myself, and I've done some research, and yet I've heard that there might be a digital nomad visa. But right now, I'm looking at applying for what's called like a professional liberal
Mhm.
visa.
Profession liberal. I'll let
Yeah,
Molly
that's
take this
that's
one.
it.
Before,
That one.
before you tell us about that, I just have one question back to what you just said. When you say leaving France for 3 years, does that mean leaving the Schengen group or just France? Because if I go to Germany,
You can go you can go anywhere. In a sense, they don't care.
okay,
You can go where you want. You have a 10-year resident card. It's a golden ticket. Do what you want.
okay.
Mhm. Okay. And now
So,
the
sorry, so
go
the
ahead.
question would be, you're asking if I think you should apply for the Profession
Yes,
Liberale visa? I mean, if you
correct.
want to continue to work, you kind of have to, I guess, decide. So, I mean, now on the visitor visa, if you hope to stay in France long term, so that means if you hope to one day go after the 10-year card, if you hope to one day go after citizenship, working remotely for a US company, whether it's your own company or you have an outside employer, you're going to run into problems when you go
Okay.
and you apply for the 10-year card or the citizenship. They just came out with a new ruling on that. In the past, we always advised our clients who would come to us for help. We always would say, of course, you can work for US remotely.
Mhm.
It's we people weren't getting denied their visas for that reason. But as more time went on and this ruling came out, it was just a couple months ago, actually, it was in June of 2025, and they really came out and said, no, that is not allowed. Now, since then, we've been advising people, if you don't have plans to stay in France long term, if you just want to go over there for a couple of years, you can continue to do that. You're going to get approved for your visa, and you're not going to have to eventually, show your tax documentation in order to be able to stay more long term. But if you do hope to stay longer term and you do want to work, that's where we're suggesting that people do apply for the Profession Liberale visa.
And to just get a little into the weeds on this, because this is a you have to understand when you said, you heard about it online, it's the war of the digital Karens. The people who
Right.
are insisting, how dare you think you can work remotely in
Right.
France?
Yes.
The French police are going to show up and deport
Yeah.
you. I mean, this is all scare tactics. None of this is true. None of that's ever happened before, but it's because of either a tug of war or a lack of clarity. France is not, when you mentioned digital nomad visa, I sort of chuckled internally. That's like 60 years away for the French. The law that governs profession liberale, the visa classification I hold,
Mhm.
the law that governs it dates from Louis XIV. Things
Wow.
do not move quickly in France. There are countries that have digital nomad visas, Croatia,
Mhm.
Estonia, Spain, or if they don't have a visa, they have laws dealing with digital nomads. France is not a fast-moving country, so I wouldn't hold my breath if anyone's hoping for that. But the
Mhm.
distinction is between immigration and the tax office. The
Mhm.
tax office does not make immigration law, and the immigration office does not make tax law.
Mhm.
The tax office is asserting its power and in a way is affecting immigration. So what
Right.
Molly was alluding to, the fact that if you just want to come to France for a couple of years, yes, continue to work remotely and disregard the advice of the tax office because we've helped many people get a visitor visa, and as their proof of income, they had a letter from their employer. A letter from their employer saying, I'm going to be working remotely and here's the salary so and so is going to get.
Right.
Stamp approved. So
Right.
clearly, immigration has no problem with working digitally.
Right.
That's simply a fact. The
Right.
tax office seems to have a problem with it. And
Mhm.
this also comes to a non-understanding for Americans of how the French view their laws. In
Hmm.
America, in Anglo-Saxon understandings of law, if it doesn't say you can't, you can. So if
Mhm.
it doesn't say no U-turn, you can make a U-turn.
Right.
In France, if it doesn't say you can, you can't. So the digital Karens, being French, would get online and say, well, it doesn't say you can, so you can't. And if
Mhm.
you're the famous quote I hear over and over, or I see on Facebook is,
Mhm.
if your butt is in France, you are doing work in France.
So
Exactly.
I don't know. I don't
And
know where
that's
the
what
focus on.
gave me a whole lot of stress when we
Yeah,
first moved because
I
I
don't know.
was doing remote work
Yeah, I
still.
don't know
I
where the
view
focus on butts came in the first place.
I
But
I view those
the
people as just trying to stop Americans from moving to France, just to scare them
maybe
into not coming.
I know.
maybe, but I think they have a special joy in their heart of telling
Right.
people that they
It's
can't do
true.
something that
Mhm.
France is reserved for them, and you've got to go figure it out. They're,
Yeah.
Right.
I very much see them as digital gatekeepers.
Yeah.
But that's the point that we're trying to make, and what Molly was alluding to is you can disregard the tax office's advice because you can still file valid tax returns in France, as many of our visitors do, because
Mhm.
there's only a single line item for foreign sourced income. And the French
Mhm.
don't know where that income comes from. And frankly, they don't have a legal or moral right to know. And in any case, it's not been a problem for our visitors who have
Mhm.
that visa. So if you just want to come for a couple of years, the problem that comes later, what Molly was alluding to, is in order to have residency long term, the 10-year card or citizenship in France, you need to prove that you have French derived income
Mhm.
and that it is substantial. So the test that's required for you to keep a visa, which is what is called the SMEEK, which is a nationally decided minimum wage, that's
Mhm.
all you really need plus 20% to keep your visa. But you need roughly 3 times, you probably need 2 times the SMEEK to get a 10-year card, and you need 3 times the SMEEK to get a citizenship.
Mhm.
That's what we've seen from our data, from our cases, the people we've worked with. And if you have below that, you're going to get denied. We've also
Mhm.
seen that from our cases. So if you don't plan to go for citizenship or you don't plan to get a 10-year card, you can continue to keep your remote work forever. But if you want to prove that you have some sort of integrated life in France, you have to get a profession liberale visa, enabling you to serve French or international clients using your French freelancer sole proprietorship. It's not a corporation,
Mhm.
and then you're legal, and depending on
Mhm.
how much money you bring into that business, you can
Mhm.
then, 5 years down the line, look at residency or citizenship, because that's the test you're looking for is 5 consecutive years of tax paying residence.
Right.
And the Professio Liberale, if KJ were to get that, would I be included in that just because I'm her husband?
That's
You
what he would apply as a family member. Is that correct?
Yes, but there would still, you can do that, and be a helper on your business. You could say he's an assistant or something like that, but it doesn't give him the right to to work. It allows him to help you as a family member,
Mhm.
and there's some income there, and he'll have his own proof of income related to the retirement.
So it sounds like to me that we would be better off just applying for the long stay visa.
It depends on your long-term
Depends on your
goals.
long-term plans.
Yeah.
Hmm.
If you're okay just being a resident in France
Hmm.
and you're not interested in citizenship or the
Hmm.
10-year card,
Right.
then you
Right.
don't have to change anything,
Exactly.
and your application is very simple.
Okay. Yeah, I think
This isn't
that's
to
what it's
say,
sounding
this
like.
isn't to say that the slow-moving wheels of French bureaucracy don't one day say digital work is going to be governed under something else, and you now need to apply, and you would have to change your visa status to something
Right.
else. So
Sure.
the French state reserves the right to change its mind
Right. Okay.
slowly.
Okay, the second
But
question is from the Pat BRS. I am single, 58, and moving to Paris in January. Competitions for apartments is so fierce. Should I rent or just stay in Airbnbs?
I mean, he's not wrong. The competition is extremely fierce. Stephen and I like to tell this story. Another sort of side project I once helped him on, he used to show apartments for this rental agency in Paris. And he gave me the address, and I turn around the corner and I see this massive line of people, like 40 to 50 people. And I was like, oh, there must be like an exhibit, like something going on. And I'm like looking at my phone, I'm like, that's the address. And I like go up and I'm like, Stephen, like there's so many people outside. He's like, yeah, we've got a big list of people coming to see the apartment. So the demand is extremely high, and it's like this question of supply and demand. There just aren't a lot of options. So
Mhm.
a couple different things, and I'll let Stephen take this after I kind of share my thoughts, because he did figure something out interesting with Airbnb. But a couple different options. He can seek out these like expat friendly rental companies, which
Mhm.
are more expensive. You know, you're going to have to pay them sort of a finder's fee, essentially. But there's a lot of those agencies that exist, especially in Paris, and more are coming out, you know, all the time. They've really saw that gap in the market where people really need help with this. So that's one option if it's in his budget to be able to do that. Otherwise, don't limit yourself to within the walls of Paris. You know, Paris is expanding and growing every single day. They're in the process of creating this Grand Paris that's, you know, really growing outside of the you know, ring, that highway that circles around Paris. And you can find some really great places out there. My in-laws lived there for 20 years and they loved it. You know, it was a very short 25-minute RER ride from where they lived into the center of Paris. Um, if you go out even farther, which is what Stephen did, you know, there's still trains, you know, hours outside of Paris that will get you really, really easily into the city. So those would be my two pieces of advice. If he's really, you know, wants to live in Paris, which I understand. I was that person. I, you know, refused to
We were all
leave
that
Paris.
person.
Right, exactly.
um, you know, if he's willing to work with some of these agencies, that's an option. Otherwise, you know, if you're willing to be a little bit outside of the city, you know, the second a toe, you know, leaves the Paris proper, there's a lot more options, and a lot more budget friendly options too, if that's a
Mhm.
concern.
We lived in Versailles for 2 months, and
Okay, yeah.
we trained in, and when we were
Super
when we
easy.
were on the express coming in, it would be less than 20 minutes, I think.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
you've got three stations to choose from, trains leaving every 20 minutes. I mean,
Right.
that's an
Mhm.
unusual situation.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. But it's not, you would think it would be more economical, but it's really not quite that much of a difference, which
Well,
is,
I mean,
yeah.
Versailles, you
Yeah,
know,
Versailles.
the idiom in French is not, turn out the lights. It's not Versailles, in French.
Right.
That's what you say when you want people to turn the lights off.
Right.
Um, to add on to Molly's point and to answer the follow-up question that the person had, can I just stay in Airbnbs? For
Mhm.
immigration purposes, no, in the sense of you need to have a permanent address by the time you
Mhm.
do your validation. So you can't just keep moving to different Airbnbs. You have
Mhm.
to think about your address as a bureaucratic function. It cannot
Mhm.
move with you.
Mhm.
Now, you could solve that by having effectively a UPS store type address. So there's different co-working spaces that will offer you an address that's not cheap, but you can
Mhm.
just pay and that have that be your address, and that will tie you to where you will go for your immigration processes. But the short answer to that is if you're saying, can I just stay in Airbnbs? You could in the beginning, that's what I did.
Mhm.
So I went that year ahead of time that I told you, I negotiated with an Airbnb. I met her a year ahead of my move. We had coffee, and I said, do you think I could stay here and just pay you monthly rent? And she squinted at me because it was an eighth floor apartment, 60 square feet, and there was no elevator. And she was thinking, are you crazy? In her mind, I'm sure. And
Right.
she's
Right.
like, hey, foreigners, Americans, I don't pretend to
Mhm.
understand these people.
Mhm.
So she agreed. And so I was able to put her address for my permanent address. She then created an attestation de hébergement. She gave a copy of her passport, a copy of her EDF, her electricity bill. This is the driver's license of France. So if Americans think you use your driver's license for a lot of things, in France it's not a driver's license because a third of French people don't even have a driver's license.
Mhm.
It's your electricity bill. That shows that you have status in
Official.
France, right?
Hmm.
And so even if he does do an Airbnb, his Airbnb host is going to have to provide that.
Hmm.
And so some people are illegally Airbnb, and you can tell right away, they'll scurry away when you ask for this and suddenly ghost you. And I don't know why the French government makes it very easy to do it legally. I don't know why
Yeah.
people would do it illegally.
Right.
But uh, I then, by the time it came for my 90 days when I went to the OFI office, I had already moved on to another apartment, and that was
Hmm.
my permanent one. And I
Hmm.
had found that, strangely enough, back in the day on Craigslist, I wouldn't recommend it now. But as Molly said, the market's changed and there's a lot of apartments. But the number we hear often is about 40. There are 40 people seeking one apartment. So
Hmm.
that's who you're competing against. And you're usually just competing against finance. That's really the only part of the application that matters. The French want to know how much money you have. I
Hmm.
got outbid for an apartment some years later by a Colorado dad who paid for his daughter's entire rent up front for a year, which is
Yeah.
illegal. But
Oh, really?
Wow, we
yes,
almost did
We
that.
almost did that when we were in
listen,
Paris.
and that's the thing is it's also illegal to rent an apartment. It's not illegal to rent. It's illegal to let an apartment under 9 square meters. And yet those were my first two apartments. And so the
Hmm.
French will always react when I tell them it's 6 square meters, and they would say that's illegal. And I said, well, that's easy for you to say. I didn't have any place to stay.
Right,
And
right.
so, and I paid a lot when you tell them it was
Hmm.
800 euros a month for my 6 square meters.
Wow.
And I say that's the price you pay for not knowing anyone,
Right.
because as your life develops in France, you get
Hmm.
resources, and those resources are, hey, my friend's moving out of his or her apartment. Anyone
Sure.
interested? And that's how you find apartments.
Right.
You don't find them on the internet
Yeah.
or in agencies,
Hmm.
but people have to drop their entitlement, say, I don't know anybody, so the price I pay for not knowing anybody is an agency fee, which could be two,
Hmm.
three, $4,000, however big your apartment is or how much your
Right.
rent is. And I may
Hmm.
have to pay that if I don't find another apartment when it comes time for renewal. So a
Hmm.
lot of these agencies, they'll charge at least for the first couple renewals, maybe sometimes indefinitely, but they provided a great service for you. You have a fully furnished apartment with no
Hmm.
fuss, no muss. Otherwise, there are other things that you have to keep in mind, which we don't have in America, but we have equivalents. So there's no credit scores in France, but you have relationships with banks, and if you don't have this, then you have to have what is called a guarantor. And there are
Hmm.
services that have come up. Garant.me is
Yes.
probably the most well-known
Hmm.
one,
Hmm.
in which someone stands behind you and says, if this person runs off somewhere, I will cover you.
Hmm.
And there are
That's like the key
services.
thing is what my husband, who is French, explained to me. It was with these landlords. It truly is nothing personal against you. And if you get told no, even if you do have the financial piece, sometimes it's the fact that they see a foreigner, could be American, could be really any foreigner, and they think they could just leave one day and never pay
Right.
the rent. And how
Right.
are we going to find them? Because, they leave the
Hmm.
country. That's what my
Sure.
husband explained to me. And so that's something to keep in mind too, maybe when
Yeah.
you're feeling a little bit discouraged as you're trying to find places like, what am I doing
Hmm.
wrong? I thought
Right.
I had everything. And that's why people
Hmm.
get into these situations where they do these technically illegal things, such as pay for rent at 1 year in
Hmm.
advance.
Right. Right.
Or
Yeah.
the French will do illegal stuff too. They don't, maybe they work as a teacher, they don't work as teachers, they don't have a lot of money. So
Hmm.
they'll ask their engineering friend for a pay slip, and then they'll forge and put their name in place, and then they'll use that. This is French people, all
I
right?
have
Wow.
so many of my French
Yeah.
friends who
So
have done that.
I know
Um,
it. I know
Wow.
that it's happened.
Yeah.
So that's the French people in the Paris marketplace. So
mhm,
you're
Hmm.
talking about the most desired real estate
Right.
for expats outside of maybe the Côte d'Azur and Nice.
Right. Right.
But
Which is where we're moving.
strangely enough, Nice is not anywhere near as competitive. It's still competitive, but not
Hmm.
anywhere near as bad as
mhm.
Paris.
Hmm.
Nothing's as
So
bad as
and Molly alluded to, I for 2 years lived in a small medieval town of 3,000 people called Moret-sur-Loing, which
Hmm.
I visited first in 2016, and I remember thinking, oh, what a cute little town.
Hmm.
Maybe I would live here one day, and I had no idea. In 2021, and Molly helped me move out there. I would live out there for a couple years, and it has multiple lines coming into Gare de Lyon, and
Hmm.
it's included in your Navigo pass. So I didn't
Mhm.
have to pay anything extra. And I had an electric bike, which was partially subsidized by the city of Paris. That's a different article, different story.
Mhm.
But I would ride my electric bike to the station, hang my bike up on the rack. 45 minutes later, I'd be at Gare de Lyon, and vice versa. When I came back, I was in my little medieval town, and I had a wonderful time. But I thought by the time that it's at 20 and in the year 2021, I'd had my French company, French freelancing business for
Mhm.
years. I had
Mhm.
tax returns. So
Mhm.
I strode in, and Molly was actually helping me with finding some apartments to look at. And they were really suspicious.
So suspicious.
What is this foreigner doing coming out to Moray? We're just this little town. Who are you? And so they
Mhm.
thought I was a scammer.
Hmm.
And so I either would be shown places I didn't like, or I was
Mhm.
refused entrance to see places I did like.
Wow. Mhm.
And so I went back to the beginning and I thought, well, I'm just going to check out Airbnb. And I found a listing that I really liked. I messaged the owner, would you be interested in a long-term rental? Sure, let's meet for coffee. We met for coffee. It was across the street from a cathedral that was built in the 1300s, right on the main street. And we met, and we actually signed a 3-year lease because it was unfurnished.
Wow.
How common is that to message the Airbnb owner and effectively bypass Airbnb?
Well, when you say, I mean, I think it's generally common. I don't know how common it is in France, but the thing
Mhm.
that Airbnb is blocking is exchange of information. So you can't send a phone number or an email address. But since
Mhm.
we're talking about Moray, just I'll meet you across the street from the church.
Right.
Airbnb doesn't see that as
Mhm.
a threatening message, so
Hmm.
Right.
they don't
Mhm.
block it, and
Mhm.
then that's that. So you can use
Mhm.
the contact the owner, contact the listing owner
Mhm.
anytime. But the fact I don't think I'm special. I'm sure many other people have done
Yeah.
that.
I'm
I've thought
It's
sure.
worth a
Mhm.
try. It's worth a try, I
I,
say, if you get to
I've
that point.
I've thought about doing that, but we are trying to do things right, right? And not
It's not illegal. I mean,
Well, no, it's not. Yeah.
Airbnb might have some beef that you use their platform, but even if you want to, you could do a 1 day rental and
yeah,
try it out, meet the owner, get all the information, and then after that, Airbnb doesn't own it forever. So if
right.
you
Right.
want to quote unquote do things the right way, do a 1 day rental, meet them,
Mhm.
and then
Mhm.
have a coffee with them then.
Right. Well, let's move on to some more questions we have here. So we have one from a curated lifestyle, and they ask, I would like to know the best French insurance companies to apply to for a private health insurance policy while waiting to get the carte vitale.
I have had great luck personally with Harmony,
Mm-hmm.
Harmonie. I used that for my mutuelle for years, and it
Mm-hmm.
was very affordable. Had no issue with it at all. I really enjoyed it. Another one that I like to recommend is AXA, AXA.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my two
And when you say
recommendations.
affordable, can you give us an idea how much?
So I was using it for my mutuelle once I already had the carte vitale. So it was essentially top up insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And I needed that because I wear glasses and contact lenses. So I needed to go to the eye doctor. I wanted to go to the dentist. I had certain medications that I was taking. And I was paying, I believe at the time, 42 euros per month for that.
Wow.
And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to pay for any of my medications, didn't have to pay for any of my doctor's appointments.
Mm-hmm.
Healthcare is just so affordable, especially coming from the United States. I
Mm-hmm.
remember when I first went over and I was in that interim waiting period of waiting for the carte vitale. And I
Mm-hmm.
had to go to the doctor. And I remember being like, oh, it's going to be at least, a couple $100 just to go see a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to the desk to pay and I was like kind of sheepish about it. I was like, I don't have my carte vitale. And they were like, oh, that's okay. But like they kind of looked concerned and they were like, it's going to be 25 euros. And I was like, 25 euros. I like
Yeah.
wanted to cry from joy. I was so happy about it. And then two, when you're waiting for that carte vitale, so that's to give you an idea of the cost of things without it. And while you're waiting for it, you save all of like the receipts that you get from the doctor. And then once you have the carte vitale, you send all of those to them and then they pay you back. And they
Wow.
actually do. They actually do. I got paid back for, I did end up waiting quite some time for mine. I think I ended up waiting between 6 and 8 months. And they paid back all of those months of all of the care that I got.
I remember you telling a story, recounting a story on the YouTube channel where I first encountered you being interviewed, and you told a story of going to the US and
Oh,
I think it was, right? Like, and you went to the
yes.
emergency room or somewhere, and that when you
Mhm.
went back to France, they actually paid for that. That you
They did. They
submitted
did.
the receipts and they paid.
Mhm. Yes, they didn't pay for the entire thing, but they paid
Right.
for a
A
big chunk of it.
portion, right? A
Right.
portion.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
and some people were very upset in the comment section, I think accusing Molly of abusing the French system or something like
It's
Of
that.
like
course.
I,
Of
at that
course.
at that
Those
point,
are the
at that
Karens you're
point,
talking
Right.
about.
Of course.
There
yes,
there are Karens everywhere, Karens
they
everywhere.
get so upset, and it's like at that point, I had been living in France for probably 6 or 7 years. I had gone home to visit my family for like a couple weeks, and my biggest mistake was not getting traveler's insurance. But
Mhm.
because I had been in the French system, as a person who was living in France, I was paying my taxes in France, and that was a perk of being a French fiscal
Mhm.
resident. And people
Right.
got so upset about it. It was so silly.
Right. So Molly's talking about the mutuelle, assuming that you have your carte vitale, but the gap is something that Molly and I really learned about as we went through. So Molly had access to a carte vitale via her student visa.
Hmm.
So you really actually have access to the French system. And I really have to explain to people, when you say the French system is the same as saying the American system, you can go anywhere in America for treatment. It's just a question of how much you're going to pay.
Hmm.
It's the same thing in France. It's just a question of who is going to pay that.
Hmm.
And you pay at the point of service in France, and then you get reimbursed a percentage. So once you're in the system, let's say it's $10, and I pay that $10. I will get $7. I'm sorry, I'm using dollars, euros. That will
Hmm.
be reimbursed into my account within 2 to 3 business days.
Hmm.
That other $3 is mine. Now, if you're like Molly and you need to go to the doctor frequently for whatever reason, the top-up insurance, sometimes they have extra. People get more. They'll get 120% insurance so
Hmm.
that they get more than the reimbursement even.
Well,
Hmm.
You have to calculate if the cost of the mutuelle is worth it. Since
Right.
I basically need to be bleeding out before I go to the doctor, I'm not a good candidate for the mutuelle. I remember
Right.
seeing my doctor after COVID, and she had, when I came in, she said, "Oh, I thought you'd moved." And she'd moved my file to the archives because she hadn't seen me for so long. And I said, I said, "Doctor, you know me. I'm not
Mhm.
someone who comes very frequently."
That's how
But
Tony is.
so the top-up insurance doesn't make any sense for me. That's why
Hmm.
I never got it. Now, I didn't get my carte vitale until I switched to my profession liberale, and I was working in France, and my contributions were tied in with my business. So that was an entitlement. What I didn't realize was that you could still, and that was early on in my French journey. I didn't know at the time that visitors were also eligible for the carte vitale. In fact, anyone who's been in France for at least 90 days is eligible for that system. The
oh,
question of how the payments are made is murky. The
Hmm.
last time Molly and I appeared somewhere, it was, I don't know, 100 comment thread of
Mm.
how I'm deceptive and lying about the French system, and people were real upset that I'd said there was a loophole where some people didn't pay. And I'm just
Hmm.
going to repeat that before the 100 comment thread starts again. That we know people who have gotten a carte vitale who've never been billed for being in the system. And I don't know how or why that happens, but these people pay their taxes in France legally. They're there just for whatever reason. When they requested their carte vitale and they got it, there was no hook in. And it seems
Hmm.
in later years there has been an URSOF hook in for people who do this. So if you do obtain your carte vitale as a visitor, you start getting billed regularly for it. And so that's the thing I'll say is I'm not trying to tell people who pay that they're free riders, but I'm
Hmm.
just pointing out that in any insurance system anywhere in the world, unless it's extremely tightly buttoned up, there are sometimes people who fall through the cracks
Sure.
and
sure.
get.
Hmm.
I'm not
Of
accusing the
course.
French of anything. I'm not accusing anybody who's watching this of
Right.
anything. I have to
Right.
make all
Well,
these
Of course.
disclaimers. I'm just saying that you are eligible to get a carte vitale
Hmm.
after 90 days in France. So what you have to get prior to coming to France is health coverage. And the
Hmm.
one that we generally recommend only because it's easy. We don't have an affiliate link. We don't have any of, they're not
Hmm.
sponsored. We're not sponsored by them. Is Cigna Global.
Hmm.
You can choose a monthly payment plan. You can choose a very high deductible. and use that to get your visa. And then once you've been in France 90 days, you can apply for your carte vitale. And once you get that, you can cancel that Cigna Global insurance.
Mhm.
And that will really depend on how high the deductible is that you choose as to how much
Right.
you pay. But you can go in there,
So,
little wizard that will tell you how much it'll be.
Yeah.
It depends on your age. So it make no sense for me at the time. I would have been, 20, late 20 something, early 30 something. My insurance rate is going to be different from someone in their 50s or 60s.
Sure.
so someone like me, a lot of people that are moving to France seem to be my age, right? They're older, retiring to France. I'm assuming that Medicare doesn't help me at all.
Well, when you say Medicare, you're talking about your treatment in France.
Yes.
So it's still applicable for you if you go back for your treatment in America, but
Yeah.
you're covered. You're covered once either if you have private insurance or if you enter the French system by getting a carte vitale, that'll be
Mhm.
that. Interestingly, with Social Security, people don't realize this. You can have your Social Security directly deposited into your French bank account.
Yeah. I read that recently
You
somewhere.
don't have to have it, you don't have to transport it all over the
Well,
place.
and now that you've brought that up, I think that it's a perfect segue to ask the question relative to getting a bank account, because that's a big one for a lot of people, right? Is the how do I get a bank account? And this is one where I think a lot of people who do offer to help people in the process, when maybe it's not necessarily necessary, use this kind of scare tactic of, well, you're going to need help to get a bank account and you're not going to be able to get a bank account on your own and things like that. At least that's what I've heard from some people, that that's like a big sticking point is, it's too complicated and you're not going to be able to do it and all this stuff. So what's the truth?
I mean, in some ways, they're not wrong, okay? In
Okay.
the sense of the French bank manager will straight up refuse you, even though you have the correct status. And it will depend on the bank, the flavor of the
I was
bank.
just going to say that it depends totally on the bank. Like if you go into certain banks, they will refuse you because you're American, but you just have to know not to go into those banks.
Mhm.
We have
Right.
so many
Are you
lists on our site and on our YouTube channel of foreigner American friendly banks, and so just go to those banks and you'll have much better luck.
We have
so
an
it's
article on the website about getting a French bank account, and the comments section has served as an updated, refreshed list where people will
Mhm.
come in and say, "Well, I've had really good luck with this bank, etc."
Mhm.
And before we started recording today, I was sharing that on one of the Facebook forums, someone clearly had had a bad day with BNP Paribas, and they
Mhm.
said, "Americans beware, this is a terrible bank."
Yeah.
And I had commented, I said, I'm sorry, I've had the complete opposite experience. I love this bank. I've obtained 2 loans with them, paid them back. I love them. I love everything
Mhm.
about BNP Paribas. I love the app. Yeah, I love everything about them. And I had that when I originally, my personal account was with Societe Generale. I do not have nice things to say about Societe Generale, but I
Mhm.
opened my French freelancer business. I wanted to open it with a different bank. I opened it with BNP Paribas. I walked in there. I had no problem doing it.
Mhm.
So when they say you're going to have a hard time, you need help, in a sense, that's true. It
Mhm.
depends on how assertive you are
Mhm.
and how much French you know.
Mm.
Mhm.
Because as a French resident, you have a legal right to a bank account. One could
Mhm.
argue you also have a moral right to a bank account.
Mhm.
It's just a question of how assertive you want to be. And tying back to the Societe Generale story, the reason why Americans are troublesome is because of a law called FATCA, which came into effect during the second Obama administration. And it makes compliance burdensome for French banks. To give you an idea, I've been told by insiders in the banking industry, it's roughly 1,000 euros per month per account, which means I cost BNP Paribas with my 2 accounts 24,000 euros a year for compliance purposes. I don't make them that kind of money,
Mhm.
but other Americans do. So that's why
Mhm.
I'm welcome, you know.
Mhm.
But the cost of compliance means that some bank managers don't want to deal with you. So I had my home Societe Generale account in the 17th arrondissement, which was where I first lived in Paris. And as an aside, when I would tell people I lived in the 17th, people would make that noise. And I would remind them it was a shoebox on the eighth floor with no elevator.
Is
So,
is that a rich arrondissement?
it's a very fancy arrondissement because it's
Okay.
one of the later ones that was incorporated into the city. So the apartments are much larger.
Mm,
And it was farmland a couple hundred years ago,
mhm,
pasture land rather, not farmland. So when I transferred, I wanted to transfer my bank to where I had moved to in the 19th.
mhm,
It was held up, and I went back to my counselor in the second, and I said, "What's going on?" And she dug around. She says, "Oh, the manager is refusing to transfer you in because you're an American." Because what would mean is the burden of paperwork is going to fall to her.
Mm.
And so she
mm.
was just able to hold up my transfer.
Wow.
And I think 6 months later, she got transferred, and some other person who wasn't afraid of paperwork for an American transferred me over. But in the meantime, if I had any essential bank functions where I needed to talk to someone, I had to go to the 17th, which was no problem. I like
Mhm,
the 17th a lot. But there's an example of even when I'm a French bank customer, the issue of being an American is an irritant, and you need to extend some grace to them. It's not as
right.
if we're making it hard for them. If we were any
Mhm,
other nationality, they wouldn't have such a hard time with us. But we have an onerous law, which they have to comply with. And some banks just have advised outwards to their counselors, refuse Americans. And
mm,
Americans, and they rightly guess, Americans will just walk out confused.
mhm.
Well, I thought I could get a French bank account. I don't
Right,
understand. And then
right.
they go and cry on Facebook about it.
Mhm.
And that help is effectively a French friend. If you have a
Yeah.
French speaking friend, I remember I was having a real hard time with Electricité de France has a gas side of it as well. And I was having trouble getting them coming to install gas at an apartment I'd moved into that hadn't had gas in, I don't know, 7 years.
Mhm,
And I was running into, so I motioned, I was in a co-working space and I told my friend Jenny, I said, could you just come over here for a second? So she gets on, she starts yelling at these people in French,
mhm,
which I'm not going to do as a foreigner. And so
mhm.
suddenly I had a gas install, scheduled for the following Tuesday. But that's the help. So if you want to
Right.
hire someone to yell on your
Mhm,
behalf, that is money
mhm.
well spent. If you
Right,
don't want to spend that money, have a French friend. If you want to have a French friend, do what Molly did, get fluent in French and start making French friends.
right. Yeah.
It's also too, I think, just like Steve's example of there was just that manager who decided she didn't want an American. Like
Mhm.
that is something just about French culture that Americans need to kind of prepare themselves for.
Mhm,
It was one of the and I went over as a very young person, but it was one of the deepest culture shocks that I have had is this lack of, you mean I can't just make a phone call and everything's okay? Like in
mhm,
America, we're so, and maybe people will argue that it's not like this now, but we're so obsessed with customer service and the customer is always right. And we want to make everything so conviient. They don't care about
Mhm.
that in
and
France.
quick. We want it
You're right.
quick, and it's
Right.
not
Things do
that
not
way.
happen quickly in France. Things do not happen quickly in France, and things aren't necessarily quote unquote easy in France,
Mhm,
especially coming from a place like the United States. But
right,
that's just a part of moving abroad. That's a
Yeah.
part of moving to
right.
France, and it's
And
things that you really need to prepare yourself mentally for as an American in particular, I think.
It can be
Mhm,
and
part of
this
the
is
charm of it too.
mhm,
Yes, I agree. I
this is
totally
something
agree.
I push back on pretty early on going back to banks. The Americans, well, they're closed during lunch. And I'll say, how dare they think they can have lunch? They're supposed to sit at their desk and eat a sandwich over their keyboard like we do here in America.
Right,
Right.
exactly. Yeah.
And so then you see the wheels start to turn and say, oh, okay, well, maybe I'm thinking wrongly about it. You say,
Right.
yes, you are. You're thinking
Mhm,
as, which it was totally appropriate for America, right or wrong. That's how we do
mhm,
things. They
mhm.
don't do things that way here. So you
Right.
can't be resentful for people living the way that they choose to live.
Mhm. One more quick sort of sub question about the banking. Can you, because this is a question that we've gotten a lot as well, and we've tried to do unsuccessfully, is to get a bank account before you move to France.
This is a high net worth individual move, and I
Mm,
just don't see the point. It's one of those, oh, I want to feel better about it. You can get a bank account when you get here. Don't worry
Yeah,
about that.
right.
Uh,
Hmm.
but I've seen people transfer HSBC, other banks where they'll transfer in, a
Hmm.
six-figure amount into a bank account, and then that counselor works with a French counterpart and opens an account for them. I don't see the reason to do that.
Okay.
That
I
is
agree.
that
You
is
don't
peace of
need
mind.
to. I
But
think that the maybe misinformation is that somehow you need to, or there's a benefit of doing that, but clearly that's not the case.
if you're wealthy enough to do it, do it. If that gives
Mhm.
you peace of mind, but that is not available to, I'm just going to say, I'm not a high net worth individual. So if you think that's something available to you, it's not. You
Mhm.
Are
need
there?
to do something very nice for a bank that has a French equivalent,
Right.
and they will then do that for you as a
But
service.
it's not necessary.
So
It's
there
not
are no,
available.
yeah,
Mm.
there are no American banks then that have branches in France that you can, like Chase is such a huge bank, right?
Here. Hmm.
Yeah. And they don't have any Chase banks in France.
Well, I mean, Chase has a branch in France, but and that's an investment bank. There are no, we Americans have to detach from the banks that we're used to in our brain having French equivalents. And that comes down to, now we can get into the weeds. I just read a story the other day about an investment banking story from the 30s. So this is on my mind, but it goes into the weeds of how banks exist on both sides of the Atlantic and how their charters are. And just as we don't see French, there's a reason we don't see French cars in America. There's no Renaults or Peugeots. We
Hmm.
don't see a lot of French banking in America. And this is down to laws and how things have developed over the years. It's nothing, you know, it's not illegal. It just hasn't developed for
Hmm.
reasons.
Hmm.
For a while, BNP Paribas bought Bank of the West, which was a
Hmm.
US bank, but I think then Bank of the West was bought by BMO, which is a Canadian bank. So there are ways to do it. I just don't worry about
Hmm.
it. You'll get a
Okay.
French
Okay.
bank account you'll get a French bank account when you get here. And
Okay.
that either go in with a French friend or use a service and have someone go be your advocate.
Okay.
Okay.
But try on your own first. Try on your own first with the list of American French
Sure.
Hmm.
banks.
Yep.
We have two more questions from viewers. So there's that one, which
This is,
sort of is
this is Francis 3475. If you're in France on a long stay visa, do you get taxed on worldwide basis, meaning on all your assets wherever they're located?
and I've heard this somewhere.
Yeah, if
You
you're
don't get taxed twice. That's like the big misconception think a lot of people have. And I'll let Steven's much more of a tax expert than I am, but you don't get taxed twice. That's like the
Mhm.
important thing to know.
It's only because we have a tax treaty. So we happen
Yeah.
to have a tax treaty with France. So that gives credit for taxes paid in those
Hmm.
situations. As I said earlier in our conversation, when you say, do I get taxed for worldwide income? You remember you're a fiscal resident of France. So whatever visa status
Hmm.
you hold, unless, let's say, you're just coming over for a student visa for 3 months and you leave, don't worry about it.
Hmm.
Digital Karens are now going to come and attack me. But if you have spent a year there, so for example, I came in December of 2013, the digital Karens would say I was supposed to file taxes for the 2 weeks that I was in France. I didn't.
Hmm.
So I waited until 2015 for 2014. That was my full year in France. And then I filed 2014 taxes. There's a
Hmm.
line item that says foreign sourced income. So yes, you are going to have to report it. Now, the question of taxation ties to what taxes did you pay on that foreign sourced income in your other country? That is all part of the calculus, which I'm going to leave for your accountant in your own personal situation.
Right.
It's very hard to answer generic tax questions. It's
Mhm.
always
Hmm.
something personal. It's always something related to your own. But you are going to have to file taxes in France. The question of whether you pay is related to what your return looks like. And if you're just a visitor with foreign sourced income and you pay tax on that income in America, the answer is no, because
Hmm.
France can't claim the taxes you paid to America for your American income.
Sure.
Right.
That's the
Sure.
Okay.
logic of it.
Yeah,
But
that
for
makes
example,
sense.
if you have an Airbnb or a rental in France, yes, you're going to be taxed, but that's actually not income tax. That's social charges. So
Hmm.
that is a different tax classification. And yes, you would be paying it, but it wouldn't be on your quote unquote worldwide income. That's a different. And as I say, I don't want to get too much into the weeds on
Right.
general taxes, but find accountants. Molly's got a list on the website on the side, our accountant recommendations. If you have questions, just contact us.
Great.
You might know some people, but please, I don't know why people do their own taxes anyway when there are experts who are trained in
Hmm.
rules,
Hmm.
but definitely don't try to do your taxes in a foreign language. You're not that smart.
Right.
We have two great recommendations that I love both of them. One is Universal Tax Professionals, and the other one is French Tax Online. And as Stephen mentioned, they're both linked on our website, and they're both great. They're both very well versed in helping Americans in France. It's kind of like their specialty. So that's who we usually recommend.
So the last question from our viewers comes from Judith1783, and I'm warning you, it's loaded. You ready?
Okay.
How concerned are you with the dangerous riots happening in Paris?
And can I say something before you answer? We are inundated in the United States on our Google feeds with stories about how horrible things are in Paris, how you can't swim in the Seine no matter what they say, how there's bed bugs in every
That I agree
hotel.
with. That I will agree with.
Well, there's bed bugs in every hotel. There's riots all the time. Everything's always on strike. In our experience, we've been to Paris, we've been to France, I think 8 or 9 times, and we've never encountered not a single thing like this. In fact,
Well, we've experienced riots
well,
in
it was a demonstration.
demonstrations, not
Yeah.
riots, but especially
Well, I mean,
Parisians,
in
they
France,
like to
But wait,
demonstrations
protest.
and riots. I mean,
we wanted to participate in this particular one. But the
Anyway.
point being this, we were going to Paris a couple of Octobers ago, and there was a big story on the feed about bed bugs. We got to our hotel, and I became friend. We do a lot of work in the hotel once we're there, so I become friendly with
Yeah,
the
that remote work we're doing illegally.
I become friendly with the general manager frequently, and I became friendly with this guy. And I said, "What's the story with all the bed bugs?" He said, "I don't know what you're talking about. We've had no bed bug issues."
It's like they take a story and they make it huge in the US when it's really like nothing in
uh,
I
France.
have a lot of
I have lots of thoughts, but I'm going to let Molly
I
go
also
first.
have a lot of
Okay.
thoughts on this. But first of all, the one thing I would say I agree with is don't swim in the sun. I will never get behind that. And that is like a hill I will die on because of the things I've seen. Just no. But besides that, it was so funny. When I was living in France, I was there during the Charlie Hebdo terrorism attack. I was there during all of that stuff that went on around there, obviously during COVID and all of the demonstrations and protests and everything in between. And as a young woman, I never felt unsafe in Paris. And for many of the years I was living there, I was living in these quote unquote undesirable neighborhoods, these neighborhoods that apparently the police can't even step foot into because it's so dangerous. That's not true. The American media latches on to these things
Right.
and just kind of takes them and like releases them
Blows
out into
them
the
up.
wild. Yes. And I remember so many instances where I would get messages from my parents saying, like, where are you? Like, we just got news of this. I was like, what? I haven't even heard of that. Like, what are you talking
What are you
about?
talking
And people, journalists, these media companies, they like to grab people's attention. And unfortunately, we're more pulled in by these scary, terrifying things.
Right.
I felt there's, of course, maybe areas of Paris, like any big city in any part of the world,
Of course.
that are a little more sketchy than others. But again, I never felt unsafe. I maybe never went into those areas at 3 o'clock in the morning all by myself, but that's just common sense.
Right.
And
With a sign that says American.
Right, exactly.
And to your point, these things that they call riots are just protests.
Yeah.
And yes, sometimes they can get a little dicey, but I think that happens in any protests around the world. And again, if you're scared of that, don't put yourself in that situation. My husband's husband is a gendarme. My sister-in-law is also a gendarme. And it really isn't as bad as they make it out to be. I think you could say the same things about some of the news coming out of the United States. People, not to like get political or anything, but people in DC are like, things aren't bad here. What you're seeing on the news is not the reality of the situation. And that's just unfortunately the media world cycle that we live in.
I've come to the conclusion that the American media has targeted France specifically because we don't hear this about Spain or Portugal or Germany. We only hear it about France.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, you'll hear a little bit about it with England as well.
Mhm.
I don't know why that is. So I suppose I would start my answer by saying yes, but context. So when
Mhm.
people share these stories with you, it's not untrue that there are things happening, but let me give you some greater context. And part of that has to be too, there are people who are reasonably concerned. So
Mhm.
in the summer of 2024, I chose to go to Lebanon. I had family members that were quite, upset about this. And this summer I was in Cambodia when there were border clashes with the Thais, and I had family members that were quite upset about this. So I have to take the blame that I'm doing something that may be generically unsafe in some
Mhm.
ways. I'm not telling people you should go to Lebanon during summer 2024 when I went.
Right.
That's
Mhm.
not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about the fact was in 2015 when I'd moved to the second R&D small, my mom sends me a news thing from Fox saying these are no-go zones. What do you think? And I looked and my neighborhood was a no-go zone. And
Yeah.
I thought, well, that's funny. I mean, I got up this morning and I wasn't shot. I don't know how I made it. And
Hmm.
so what you have is incorrect information. Now, are there no-go zones where there are police that have specific issues with some gangs in the north of Paris? 100%. And
Mhm.
Molly's father-in-law can tell you about some of those situations. Now, is that every day? No. Was it outside my street? No. Was it in the city of Paris? No. It was out in the suburbs, and there are specific tensions around that people have to understand. Are there a lot of demonstrations? Yes. Are
Mhm.
there strikes? Yes. And if you are coming over and they say Air France is going to have a strike between July the 23rd and July the 27th, and you have a flight on the 25th, you're a moron for going to
Right.
France during that time period. They're telling you when it's going to happen.
Right.
So there are things that happen in France. There are occasions. I remember I was sitting at Le Pain Quotidien near Palais Royal in Paris,
Hmm.
and I was just working one day, and I look outside and I see a bunch of white lab coats walking past. And as you do in France, you look and see what's going on, and it was a medical student manif. So I don't know what it was about. I tried to ask one of them what they were protesting about, but they were smiling. Someone was playing music. This is a protest. This
Right.
was a protest, and so technically speaking, that was a protest.
Hmm.
But it was everyone sort of looked, and then we went back to our work.
Hmm.
Are there protests where people light trash cans on fire, attack the police, fight? Yes, strangely enough, we have those in America too.
Right.
Yeah.
And if I were to put the shoe on the other foot, I'd say, well, I look at these news reports and people are being shot at schools in America.
Hmm.
And people are being shot while talking on campus about free speech. Is
Hmm.
it safe for me to go to America? And
Right.
the minute that you say that back to an American who is presenting me with these scary headlines, you start getting, well, that's different, Stephen. Like, oh, really? Do you know of other countries where children are systematically shot in schools? And
Hmm.
I'm getting a little political, but I just want to make the
Mhm.
point here is that
Mhm.
why is it that that's okay? It's like, oh, well, I don't have a kid in school, so I can go to America and travel there safely.
Right.
Oh, oh,
It's
really?
absolutely
So,
true.
so Americans somehow white out as
Mhm.
white noise our gun violence because I guess that doesn't count.
Mhm.
But if some people throw canisters against police in France and you decide to be in the middle of that protest, then
Right.
does that make sense? So
Yes.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
answer is yes, but context matters. So
Right.
are
Well,
there strikes? Are there riots? Are there
Hmm.
no-go zones? All of these other things. Yes. However, and the
Hmm.
same thing should be extended the other way for people who would want to reverse it and present those headlines about traveling to America.
Right.
well, and you mentioned that, and those are some of the reasons why so many people are going to France.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Mhm.
things that you talked about,
Hmm.
right? The gun violence here, the riots that are going on here, all the things that are happening here. That's part of the reason why people are moving to France.
Right. Well,
Now we
enough. Well,
I was
she's trying to put a lid on the
no
politics.
I just to asterisk that or caveat or
Yes.
Molly and I had a consultation not that long ago with someone who was trying to escape the political situation in America. And
Hmm.
I said, well, do you know what the political situation is like here in France?
Hmm.
And they admitted that they didn't.
It's
And I
very
said,
It's
what do
not
you
similar.
mean?
great.
We're on our
Right.
sixth or
Yeah. Yeah.
seventh.
Right.
The
It's not.
president is on her sixth or seventh prime minister.
Yeah.
So if you're coming for an ideal political situation, let me disabuse you of that right now.
Sure.
Right. Exactly.
It's not. And
Hmm.
that you need to have, this goes back to the heart of something that we talk about, shameless plug for the book. In the
The
book
why.
is, what's your why?
Hmm.
Why are you coming to France? And if it's because you're hoping to avoid a political situation, I promise you politics are not great in France either, and then things can change. So
Right.
if you're comfortable with the political situation in France, maybe in a few years it'll be different. So your why has to penetrate deeper than a passing political situation. And I'm not trying to downplay that people may feel threatened or worried or whatever. That's true, but you have to look beyond that and say, am
Hmm.
I going to make a permanent decision or a semi-permanent decision based on the passing political mood of the day?
Right.
I don't, my advice is I don't think that's a good idea, but obviously it's your life. And if you want to, you can, but I don't think that's a strong enough reason.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I love that part of the book, that emphasis on the why and knowing your why, and especially remembering your why when times get tough, because the truth is you're moving, and moving is one of the number one stressors of all stressors that we can experience. It's moving. So when you think about, that's moving from a home to a different home, or a city to a different city. When you move from a country to a different country, that stress, I think, is definitely magnified. And to think that you're not going to experience some lows during that
Yeah.
process, and even maybe questioning yourself, or experiencing, like I did, a significant depression because of the change in the climate and being isolated and lots of different things. Being prepared for that and reminding yourself of your why to help get through those low moments. Because I think most people, maybe not everyone, like Tony, doesn't have those low moments, right? But I think most people, when you're moving to a totally different country, you're going to have some moments.
Absolutely. And I say this often. I experienced my highest highs moving to France, but also my lowest lows. It was the most challenging thing I've ever done in my entire life, but it was also the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life. And
Mhm.
so you do have to kind of know how to like insulate yourself a little bit to those lows that are definitely on the table. And as you say, and as we say, that why is part of that insulation that you can kind of go back to and almost protect yourself from those feelings. Because I also experienced some
Mhm.
sadness, deep sadness when I was over in France. But again, my biggest joys happened when I was over in France as well. So
Right.
you just have to really, the risk versus reward sort of thing,
Mhm.
do you think that's worth it to you, the possibility of having such a rewarding experience? And it may not be worth it to everyone, and that's okay too. I don't think people should feel badly if it's not for them, or if they go over for a year and they determine that
Right.
it's not for them. There's no
Mhm.
shame in going home, and
I
we,
mean,
we say that all
kudos to them for even trying. I'm a big
Right.
advocate for that. And your why may change.
the time.
You know,
Right.
what brought Molly to France isn't what kept her there.
Yeah.
And I would argue the same thing for me. So reserve the right for that to evolve and change over time,
Mhm.
and and realize I don't think I said it in the book, but I've said it in other places that if I had known how hard it was going to be, I might not have done it.
Mm.
I
Right.
think I just had an impetuous desire, a strong desire, and it walked me through all those difficulties. But
Right.
looking backwards and then counseling other people, they're not me. So I have to
Mhm.
deconstruct the reasons that I came and that Molly and I both zeroed in on. Oh, well, we had a reason to be here. And
Mhm.
every single time we had someone leave, we saw someone leave or we counseled someone who leave, they had a very romantic notion of France,
Mhm.
and it's going to be baguettes and it's going to be
Right.
baguettes and people are going to, and it is those things. It isn't
Mhm.
not those things, but it's got to be more than that if you're going to have people speaking a different language at you every day,
Mhm.
and that you're going to find it hard to connect with French people if you haven't unlocked that key or you haven't worked on that language, or you're wondering what to do for money because you haven't figured out the money situation. So all of those things are legitimate stressors. But if you are, as Molly and I so often did, pinching yourself as you walk through Paris,
Yeah.
you somehow make it through all of that. I'm
Mhm.
sure it's the same for, I remember reading about John Hamm, the actor, and the sort of difficulties went through, and he had been rejected for 6 roles the year that he got Mad Men. And
Wow.
and just thinking some of the roles he was rejected because he was not considered handsome enough as a leading man. And you just think
Oh
John
my
Hamm
God.
was not John Hamm was not considered, and
Right.
but he had a, he was, just living in an apartment somewhere, working, trying to get through, but he had this why, he had this vision to push him through.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I'm not saying you need to be an actor in Hollywood. I'm just
Mhm.
saying that whatever your why is, that it and I'll give an example. There are some people who came over for a romantic relationship, and the romantic relationship ends. And
Mhm.
sometimes they go because of that. Maybe the pain's too much, there's too much association. But other times they made their own life, and then they follow their own different journey in France, and what got them there isn't what kept them there.
Mhm.
Right.
So be open to that, and and just keep asking yourself that question, and give yourself permission to say, you know what, I'd like to go back. There's no shame in that. People, I think,
Mhm.
have shame about it, and I just want to applaud those people. You came and did something that most people don't do. You followed a dream, you followed a desire. It didn't work out. That's okay. Be proud of that time that you have. No one can take those memories from you.
Mhm. Absolutely. So, is there anything else that we haven't asked that you think is important for us and or our viewers to know?
I mean, I think I briefly touched on this when I was giving my little intro, but I really do just want to emphasize learning French as being important. And I'm not a very good example because I went over knowing nothing. That was part of what made me experience the lows that I did, is frustration because I could understand what people were saying to me, but I couldn't convey what I wanted to say
Mhm.
back. These very, very simple tasks of just going into a store and asking a question became like my Mount Everest. And it was just so anxiety ridden, these
Mhm.
very menial everyday tasks. Feeling of isolation. In a place like Paris, you can make friends easily because there's a lot of other English speaking expats there.
Mhm.
I got to a point where I kind of came to the realization that's not living in France. I'm
Mhm.
with people, other Americans or Australians or English people, and we're all speaking in English, and
Mhm.
we're kind of like almost vacationing in France in a way. And if you go in a place outside of Paris, yes, you may find people who speak very broken English, but you can't really create a meaningful relationship in that way.
Right.
And so that to me is the most important part of moving there that I think a lot of people kind of bypass over because,
Mhm.
English is one of the most spoken languages in the world. So we are very lucky in that when we go on vacation to places, we're able to kind of get along or get by. But if you want to live there and actually make a life for yourself there and create these relationships with French people, which I would argue is the whole point of going over there,
Right.
and really experience true French culture, not this like digestible Americanized version that is kind of
Mhm.
very rampant in Paris, especially.
Mhm.
You need to learn the language. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying this, like it's so
Mhm.
easy.
I have my complete
Yes.
friend. I have like so many apps on my phone. It's crazy. I know that, once we get there, I plan on enrolling in school, like really like
I,
some
I
sort
would
of,
I would encourage you to see if there are any meetup groups in your area that speak French.
I
That's
was
a
going to
great,
say the apps and the books are great.
here in
in
the
America.
US.
Hmm.
Yeah.
If
Okay.
you can get someone that you can actually get speaking with,
Mhm.
that for me, because I am someone, in English, my native language can be a little bit more reserved, a little bit more shy. That piece of like actually speaking with someone was
Mhm.
the hardest part for me, but it was really like the key to me having confidence and like the wherewithal to really put myself out there and actually
Right.
try and like speak with
Mhm.
people. So having the baseline of like the grammar and how to, string a sentence together is great. But if you can find a meetup group, if you can find a tutor, if you can
Mhm.
find someone you can maybe do like an exchange with, even if it's like over Zoom, like
Mhm.
this,
Mhm.
that will put you in a really great position for when you actually go there and someone starts speaking, rapid fire French in your face
Sure.
and you're like, but I thought
Right.
I knew this.
Right. Mhm.
Yeah.
Conversation is everything. I try to point that out to English speakers. We didn't learn English by books and that sort of thing. We did in some way. My mom would show, say, "What's this? This is an apple," but it was through conversation and hearing. And so you're going to make much greater progress in France the more that you speak it. And so there are plenty of meetup groups in America. And it might be it might be French, Spanish, Italian, and then people are just exchanging in those different
Mhm.
languages. But even if you're just struggling along, I promise you, you're going to make greater progress just struggling along and
Mhm.
hearing it being spoken around you than
Mhm.
just working in the apps all day because it can feel like drudgery working in the apps.
Yeah. Okay.
The only thing I would add to Molly's learning French is I saw a photo in a Facebook group the other day of 30 Rubbermaid tubs and people talking about getting a container to move to France. And I
Mhm.
was somewhat traumatized by this. And I suppose I want to strike a balance between I get that people have antiques or special mementos from their family that they want to keep and bring with them to France. I'm not denigrating that. But as someone who came with 4 suitcases and thought maybe I could have come with less, come with fewer suitcases, I would say less is more. When you are taking the opportunity to move to France, take it as an opportunity to do some clearing out anyway, some life clear out, and say, do I really need to bring this across the ocean? And I would push that line, less is more. We push that in the book as well.
Mhm. Okay, that's great advice. Well, I know we went a little bit longer than we had planned to, so I really appreciate both of you being here and I appreciate your time. And I know that our viewers are really, I are going to find this super valuable
Yeah.
because I know that we have. And just as a final plug we're going to put links in the description to go and get your book and also to check out your blog, The American in Paris. So thanks
Thank you
again
so
Thank
much.
you.
both of you.
And
Thanks for having us.
we'll be giving your audience a discount code for our book, so they'll get $9 off. So I'll send you the
Oh,
code and you can put that into the description and they can feel free to use that for any form of the book. So
Great.
terrific.
That's
yeah,
wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
thank
Thanks for
you.
having us.
Wow, that was a lot of
A
information.
lot.
I thought a lot of great information, and I don't know about you, but I'm watching the video over and over to get information for myself that I thought I already knew. So I really enjoyed it.
And if you have any other questions for Stephen and or Molly, we're putting their information in the description, the link to their blog, the link, of course, to their book, which you can purchase at a discount. They were so nice to provide a discount for our viewers. And I know just by going through the blog myself that there's just a wealth of information already posted on their blog. So definitely check that out and also subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And if you're interested in following our journey back to France for the second time.
And you mentioned earlier changing the name back to KJ and Tony Moved to France. And I think that's because things are starting to really happen now. And so
We're excited to share it with you.
we're coming.
So thanks for watching, and we hope you'll join us again in the next video.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.